Ärger hatte ich eigentlich immer und das ist heute nicht sehr viel anders. Schon dieser Makel, dass ich immer noch realistisch arbeite. Es hieß früher sozialistischer Realismus. Und das, was als sozialistischer Realismus in die Kunstgeschichte eingegangen ist, darüber habe ich eigentlich immer polemisiert, weil das mit Realismus wenig zu tun hatte, weil ein Bild der Realität verfälscht wurde. Und zwar gezielt verfälscht wurde. Es gab meiner Arbeit gegenüber in den 70er, 80er Jahren teilweise auch großes Entgegenkommen und ich habe ja auch eine ganze Reihe von Auszeichnungen erhalten. Ich stehe dazu, ich stehe auch zu einigen Fehlleistungen, die ich früher in den 50er Jahren gemacht habe, vielleicht teilweise auch mit Recht kritisiert worden bin, so wie es dann später in den 70er und 80er Jahren nicht viel anders war und heute ist es nicht viel anders. Ich werde das auch weiter ertragen und ertragen können, wie in der Vergangenheit auch. Ich habe es verkraftet.
Im Herbst 1988 tritt Willi Sitte als Präsident des Vereins Bildender Künstler zurück. Er lebt immer noch als Maler in Halle und ist nicht aktives Mitglied der PDS.
Of all the German painters of the Renaissance, the one who strikes us today as the most progressive was Hans Baldung Grien. There is a psychological intensity to his work that appeals to modern audiences. Grien was born in Schwäbisch Gmünd on the Upper Rhine. He was apprenticed to Albrecht Dürer in Nuremberg, and in 1509 settled in Strasbourg, where he spent the rest of his highly successful career, passionately devoted to the new spirit of worldliness in the arts, a keen student of nature and the powers of magic. Baldung was himself a man of the new era. As early as 1507, in his St. Sebastian altarpiece from Halle, he was demonstrating a bold new use of color, using shades that had never been seen before to achieve dramatic effects. Behind the martyred saint, a young dandy in green costume and red toque looks out at us, self-assuredly. It's the painter himself, just 23 years old. Because of his fondness for natural colors and his interest in plants and trees, he was called Grien. Baldung's large workshop had a vast output, not only stained glass and book illustrations, but also an enormous number of paintings, hundreds of which have survived, despite the iconoclastic purges of the Reformation. Baldung was particularly famous for his prints. Even Dürer took some with him to sell on his travels in the Netherlands. His drawings and his woodcuts reflect the new worldliness of the age of humanism, its newfound ease with the human body, its willingness to exalt the flesh. The Fall of Man from a woodcut of 1511. A salacious Adam creeps up behind Eve and reaches for her breast in a way that Grien uses over and over again in his scenes of men taking possession of women. We see it again in The Ill-Matched Couple, the artist's first copper engraving. Human mortality, the transience of earthly delights, are the major themes of Baldung's work. The dance of death was a favorite subject in medieval wall paintings, pointing out the transience of life and exhorting spectators to look to the eternal salvation of their souls before it was too late. No one could escape death, not even beautiful young maidens in the first bloom of womanhood. From 1500 onwards, Baldung began presenting the subject in increasingly vivid terms. Death sneaks up with glee on its shocked victims. The The small size of these pictures suggests that they were made to be viewed at home, in the privacy of the domestic setting. A beautiful young girl studies her own reflection in a mirror. At her feet, a cupid and some apples, traditional symbols of man-snaring. Triumphantly, Death waves an hourglass above her, but the witch seems to deter him with magic powers. It is Death himself who is decaying. Hair sprouts from his skull, and the flesh hangs limp from his bones. But there's life in him yet. Unlike some of Grien's representations of Death, macabre skeletons straight off a dissection table, this one still has a body and seems to feel some regret. The Grim Reaper goes about his work much more fiercely in a drawing from 1515, now in Berlin. This Death behaves like an enthusiastic lover and energetically grips the flanks of his buxom prey. She is well aware of her own attractiveness and checks her hair in the mirror, a gesture of some erotic significance. Every detail of her physique has been carefully observed. Only studies from a live model could have provided such intimate knowledge of the female body. Baldung evidently made such studies while working on a major cathedral commission in Freiburg. Our picture, Death and the Maiden, painted on a limewood panel, only 30 centimeters high, dates from this time, 1517. There is an inscription in the top right-hand corner. "Here's where you have to go," it says. Death announces the Last Judgment. His right hand points down to the gaping black grave. Although somber in coloring, Baldung's picture is typically intense. The macabre events are emphasized by a series of sharp contrasts. The pale, soft, fleshy maiden is grabbed from behind by the hard, dark silhouette of Death. Death's left hand has a brutal grip on the girl's hair and pulls savagely, a gesture of some sexual frisson. The young girl resists the fatal lift, her feet still firmly on the ground. She turns her head and body towards us. But her movements are weakening. Death's rape must succeed. Despairingly, she wrings her hands. And she cries. While these gestures were more or less conventional for the times, the doll-like fleshy appearance of the child woman and the erotic pleasure the artist takes in her plight are unmistakably the work of Baldung Grien. So is the sense of a dramatic moment, frozen at the point of maximum theatrical impact. As the girl's resistance to death erupts into unrestrained weeping, so we spectators are made keenly aware of our inability to help, just as the pale young girl herself is helpless in the clutches of death. Grien's picture has been interpreted as an allegory of vanity, of the transience of earthly delights. Another interpretation is that the girl is an embodiment of one of the 7 deadly sins, lust, facing the inevitable consequences of her actions. And yet how much understanding of life there is in this scene of death. The painter, you feel, is not entirely on the side of the moralists. He is clearly enjoying the struggle, admiring the girl's crackling gold hair. Death, although shabby, is a most energetic suitor, and hardly less seductive than the girl herself. The thin veil she wears succeeds only in emphasizing her vulnerable nakedness. Grien's meaning is clear. Eros and Thanatos, love and death, belong together. One is always lurking behind the other. The same association appears in an even more visually condensed form in a parallel work, Death and Woman, also painted in 1517. and now hanging next to our picture in the Kunstmuseum in Basel. But the struggle has intensified. Where death's earlier victim has been a young girl, an innocent personification of the future, here we are experiencing a real drama of the flesh. This mature woman knows what she is about to lose, and once again, the painter enjoys suggesting certain ambiguities. Is she veiling or unveiling herself? Is she perhaps not swooning too keenly into death's arms? Falling upon her, he overpowers his prey and keenly grasps her breasts and hair, but with curiously gentle fingers. Like a vampire, he bares his teeth, half biting, half kissing. The whole picture seems to be caught in a mighty hesitation between abhorring the horror and enjoying the desire. For Grien, love and death were bedmates. It seems as if this early German painter had some disturbingly advanced insights into our impulses. The Holbein room is one of the great highlights of the Kunstmuseum in Basel. Between 1515 and 1526, Holbein lived and worked in Basel, and the museum's collection of his early work is unmatched. But the quiet of the Holbein room is deceptive. These were troubled times. In the religious commotion of the Reformation, a vast number of works of art were removed from their original setting and destroyed. And so, in 1526, a worried Holbein left Basel for London. 2 years later, he was back, probably concerned about the safety of his family. This intimate portrait of his wife and her 2 children comes from this time. It is one of the very few pictures Holbein painted for himself, without being commissioned to do so. Unfortunately, it is no longer in its original state. The figures, painted on paper, have been cut out and pasted on a panel. Another hand has filled in the background. In the picture, Holbein's wife wears an expression of deep sadness, and the life of Elsbeth Bürgenstock was in truth marked by worries and sorrow. Married to a tanner at a very young age, she was already a widow at 22. She married Hans Holbein in 1515 and was to bear him 4 children. At the time of this painting, only 2 had been born. Her son Philip, aged 7, and her daughter Katharina, seen here as a 2-year-old. Both children cling tenderly to their mother. Philip is shown in profile. He stares piously and attentively out of the picture at something we cannot see. He seems very serious and grown up for a boy of his age. He wears a dark green jerkin, and the white collar of his shirt emerges from the neck opening. His mother lays her hand on his shoulder in a tender gesture, but Holbein has left the hand unfinished. Holbein's small daughter, Katharina, sits on her mother's lap. She, too, turns to the right. Her light brown pinafore and white blouse are as pale as her face and her blonde hair. Once again, her expression, tearful and earnest, seems too serious for the face of a 2-year-old child. The corners of her mouth are turned sadly down, and her eyes, somewhat tired, gaze into the distance. The mother shares the troubling seriousness of her children. Her bust, rising from the deep décolletage of her dress, is unadorned and plain. Her head is bent slightly forward. Her attention seems to be directed entirely inwards, to her own thoughts. Red-rimmed eyes, as if she has been crying, give Holbein's wife a careworn appearance. It's difficult to believe that this is the portrait of a young woman of only 32. Holbein, the greatest court portraitist of his time, painter of kings and queens, is allowing us an intimate look into his own private world. Brown and beige shades dominate the color scheme, endowing the picture with an autumnal sadness. In the early 16th century, this kind of intimate family portrait was still uncommon. It had been developed by the wayward Venetian genius, the contemporary of Holbein, Lorenzo Lotto, from images of the Holy Family. In Lotto's family portraits, husband and wife turn to each other with affection and comfort their children. Lotto's picture glows with domestic harmony and happiness. In Holbein's portraits, Elsbeth is alone with her children, who turn to the right as if searching for a missing presence, the presence of Holbein himself, the father who would complete the group and bring back happiness. Holbein's fatherless family group reminds us strongly of Renaissance images of the Madonna with the infant Christ and John the Baptist. It was a type of picture developed in Italy, which found its most perfect form in the Madonnas and infant Christs of Raphael. Holbein would certainly have known similar compositions from reproductions and engravings. Holbein has adopted the scheme of the Madonna with children to present his own family group in a sacred and loving light. His picture does indeed seem like a devotional image. In particular, the pious upward gaze of the young boy, but also the introverted sadness of the mother. Holbein often seems to blur the boundaries between the sacred and the profane in his work, between simple people and saints or figures from classical mythology. In this portrait of Magdalena Offenburg, a great beauty of Basel, notorious for her loose morals, the artist casts her as Venus, the goddess of love, accompanied by Amorini. Elsewhere, he dresses her up as a courtesan in the image of Lais of Corinth. Magdalena came from a leading Basel family. There was much gossip at the time about Holbein's relationship with her. The coins shown here in her open hand are quite unambiguous in their significance. Finally, Holbein used her features for the face of the famous Madonna, which he painted in 1526, shortly before his departure for London, for the mayor of Basel, Jacob Meyer von Hassen. Clearly, Magdalena Offenburg embodied for Holbein an ideal of female beauty in its many forms, from courtesan to Mother of God. Holbein could not have emphasized more clearly the difference between the glamorous Magdalena and his own sad wife, Elsbeth, prematurely aged through worry and loneliness, left alone in Basel to look after her children, which, judging from the portrait, she would surely have done with care and love. In 1529, a wave of Reformation iconoclasm hit Basel. Holbein witnessed the destruction of his own pictures. The town authorities tried to stop the famous artist from leaving by commissioning him to decorate the town hall with an ambitious fresco. 2 faded fragments of this work are all that survive. It failed to provide Holbein with reason enough to stay in Basel. In 1532, he left the town for good and moved to London. His family stayed behind. Holbein produced only one self-portrait. This drawing dates from shortly before his death. Its Latin inscription reads, Johann Holbein from Basel has shown himself here at the age of 45. In 1543, having become the official painter to the royal court of Henry VIII, Holbein died of plague. One of his jobs for the royal court had been to paint the future wives of Henry VIII. He went back to Basle only once, for a few weeks. Having hardly seen him for the last 11 years of his life, Elsbeth sold this portrait before her husband's death. She was probably in need of the money. A group of pictures in the Kunstmuseum in Basle, painted at around 1500, when Basle was a center of humanism. The Middle Ages were being superseded by a modern age, hungry for knowledge. Classical culture walked side by side with Christianity, and in the spotlight of art stood man, his deeds and tribulations, his relationship with nature, a broad, luxuriant landscape with towns and villages, churches and castles. To the left, a town with hills behind. Above the trees stretches an inky blue night sky. Small cotton wool clouds scud across it, opening out the panorama. Their edges glow with orange. Morning is breaking, and the horizon glimmers with pink, yellow, and white. On the right, a larch tree frames the scene. The painter is clearly presenting us with a drama, built up carefully in horizontal layers. The central tree divides his pictorial theater into two separate stages. In the front, on the right, a youth dressed in peacock colors lies outstretched, clearly in the throes of death. A young woman kneels beside him. Apart from her elaborate cap and costly necklace, she wears virtually nothing, just a thin gauze dress. Into her body, naked under the gauze, she prepares to thrust a gigantic sword. Her name can be seen above, Thisbe. Above the head of the dying youth, his name, misspelt, Priamus. We have before us the famous and tragic young lovers from Babylon, Pyramus and Thisbe, who in Book 4 of Ovid's Metamorphoses are prevented from seeing each other by their feuding fathers. Having agreed to a nocturnal tryst at the tree by the spring, Thisbe arrives first. But a passing lioness returning from the kill frightens her, and Thisbe flees, losing her veil.